बता दिया होता था। तो इसलिए जो है आई एम क्वाइट इम्यून टू दिस आइडिया नाउ। आई एम ऑन माय बिहेवियर वेदर शी इज वाचिंग और नॉट।
नहीं नहीं, आप ये इम्यून वर्ड गलत कह रहे हैं। आप ये कहें आई हैव नाउ एडजस्टेड टू दिस।
वो भी तो इम्यूनिटी इज बेसिकली एडजस्टमेंट्स। व्हाट इज इम्यूनिटी? इट इज बेसिकली एडजस्टमेंट्स। जो चीज पहली बार आपको खतरनाक लगती थी वो था उससे एडजस्ट कर लेते।
मुक्ता मैम, आप कैरी करिए, मेरा बीच में सिग्नल गड़बड़ हो जाएगा। मैं ऑन द वे, तो
कोई
मैं
बात
जहां भी होगा मैं घर पहुंच के एकदम ज्वाइन कर।
Monica ma'am, just 1 minute to go.
Okay, good.
With warm greetings, I extend my warmest welcome to the talk show Education 4.0 for Safe, Sustainable Societies.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the talk show organized by Samurja Educational Society on the theme Education 4.0 for Safe, Sustainable Societies. Established in the year 1991, Samurja Educational Society was conceptualized with the objective of preparing students from the marginalized section to be morally upright and vocationally self-sufficient. However, society continued its journey by taking small steps for refining the educational fabric within its possible reach through various educational activities besides conducting social outreach programs. The society also conceptualized and published periodicals and magazines for students and teachers, which are on hold due to pandemic, but will be released soon with a new digital outlook. We express our gratitude to those mentors who have supported us in the past 30 years, and we are indebted to those who have challenged us. They have a big role in our evolution. Isaac Newton once said, "What we know is just a drop, and what we do not know is the ocean." Team Samurja echoes the same sentiments. Every time with the success of one endeavor, we feel that this is just a drop in the ocean, and there is a lot to be done. The unconditional support and the trailblazing path shown by Dr. Pandey and Dr. Hasija deserve special mention. We owe the success of this talk show to them. The COVID pandemic challenged us to restructure our endeavor. The society initiated the online sessions to support students, teachers, school leaders, and the school owners. The passionate educators extended their support to share their knowledge, experience, and wisdom with the fellow educators through this talk show. The topic of today's talk show is adapting new realities. In the second episode of Cohort 2, we discussed future-proofing schools and new learning trends, CBL, competency-based learning. Even before COVID, people felt that life was much easier when apple and blackberries were just fruits. We can never change the things by fighting with the existing realities. To make the change happen, we need to build the new models. Today, technology is not an event. It's a part of our everyday life. Rather, it has become our second nature. Technology offers the opportunity to be actively involved, to be effectively connected, and collaborate with fellow Pauls across globe for a better learning experience. Today, using technology in the classroom is not a goal. The goal is to enable and ensure that learning is happening everywhere. And for that, we have to adapt the new realities. I share a snippet from the article of Steve Jobs. This is for the crazy ones, the misfit, the rebel, the troublemaker, the round peg in square holes, the ones who see things differently. They are not fond of rules and they have no respect for status quo. You can quote them, you can disagree with them, glorify them or vilify them. The only thing you can't do is to ignore them because they change the things. They push the human race forward. While some may see them as crazy ones, we see them as genius because these are the people who have, those who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world. And they really do. Apple Inc., Steve Jobs. This sounds a little different, a little unusual. So is this the new reality? Let us listen from our expert. We have with us Professor M.M. Pant, former Vice Chancellor IGNOU. Presently, he has his own business, the business of thinking. I request Professor Pant to kindly extend the verbal greeting.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to this session.
Welcome, sir. Welcome to the show. And I request Monica ma'am to welcome and introduce sir with a musical note. Welcome to the talk show, sir. We also welcome Dr. Ashok Pandey, Director from Elcon Group of Schools. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you.
Kindly extend the welcome.
Thank you, Muktaji. Thank you.
We welcome Dr. Rajesh Sasija, if the connection is still there. No, I think connection is not broken. We welcome Professor Harish Chaudhary from IIT Delhi. Sir, please extend the verbal greeting.
Thank you so much and my best wishes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. And we have a very special guest from who has connected us from US, Mr. Jogi Das. He is representing the DU University. Welcome, Jogi sir. Welcome to the talk show. He's a special guest here. I think he's muted. Welcome.
Thank you. Best wishes. Great to see so many of you. That Dr. Chaudhary and Dr. Mishra, Mukta Mishra. I am it's too early for me, but I'm listening in and wish you all the best. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. We have with us our educators, those who are the practitioners and basically those who are the direct connect with the students. We have with us Mrs. Rachna Pant. Rachna ma'am, welcome to the show. Kindly extend a verbal greeting.
Thank you so much. I am all ears, wanting to listen to new things and then try and implement them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have with us Mrs. Anubha Shrivastava, Head of Schools from Delhi International School. Anubha ma'am, kindly extend the verbal greeting.
Good evening, everyone. It's a delight and an honor to be here with the stalwarts of education industry. So a lot for me to learn. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Welcome to the talk show. We have with us the headmistress from Elcon International School, my very, very lovely dear friend. Rather, so many things I learned from her, Mrs. Sunita Raji. Sunita ma'am, welcome to the show.
Namaskar, Mukta ji, and thanks for inviting. I'm so eager to gather some nuggets from Professor Pant's treasury, so that I can take them back. Yeah.
But I cannot forget the way you have explained me the Konark temple and the scientific approach and the structure. And I'm still, continuing with that Gita's lesson which you have forwarded, and we discuss it. So you are in fact a mentor in one domain of mine. Thank you, Sunita ma'am.
Thank you.
We welcome Ritu Ranjan ma'am representing Indraprastha International School. Ritu ma'am, please extend the verbal greeting.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much. Really thankful to Hasida sir, Mishra ma'am. I'm feeling so grateful and to be a part of this enriching and enlightening team. And thank you so much, ma'am.
Welcome to the show. Welcome, ma'am. I think I have covered everyone. I'm not missing. So, Pant sir, you are the synonymous of expanding the frontier of technology in education, be it IITs or IGNOU, digital or non-digital. Sunday, we were discussing about synchronous and asynchronous learning, equity and equality. We would like to start our show with a question. What are the unforeseen new realities and how we can prepare ourselves for the same? Over to you, sir.
Okay, so you've taken a very wide question. So for this, there are various reports which say what is to be expected in the next 10 years and so on, and what challenges the world is going to face. And you're expecting me to say technology is one of them, but the biggest challenge the world is facing is obesity. It is really interesting. If you look at all the data, we have moved so fast, and I'm saying this with a certain thing in mind. I'm saying this because we are moving from an era of shortages to an era of abundance. And obesity is not only in prosperous countries like US and Europe, even in India, if you look at the number of people who are obese, is very large. So when the thinkers are looking at what are the top 10 problems of the world, number one is obesity.
Yes.
Number two is population, about which we are now receiving a lot of attention and so on and so forth. And next comes this thing that I'm coming to, our own thing about education, because whether a population is valuable or worthless depends upon how well educated it is. So this is why education becomes so important, because it is not the absolute numbers that you have, but how well educated they are. And it is very interesting because India is perhaps the only country where it has taken the development of a scientific temper as a constitutional mandate. See, if you look at the US Constitution, it is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In our original Constitution, it wasn't there, but later on, around 1976 or so, Article 51AH of the Directive Principle says that it will be the duty of every citizen to inculcate a spirit of inquiry and develop a scientific temper and a spirit of reform. Why I'm saying this is that very often people are getting carried away by some detailed stuff that, what is it, app banana seek lo, coding seek lo. So they think some subject will be the magic, but it is basically going to be your ability to ask questions, to be ready for reform, to lead reform, accept change, and so on. So that is, in my view, some of the important things. But I would like to, at this stage, maybe share a story of Albert Einstein. This is one of my favorite stories. Last year, I've been talking about quite a lot in many forums. The story is that Albert Einstein was a professor at the Institute of Advanced Study, Princeton, and he was teaching physics. So like now we have exam time, it was exam time, and therefore he had to set an exam. And this story is like 120 years ago or something like that. And therefore there were no computers, no photocopiers, no laser printers, nothing of that kind. So he wrote these questions by hand and gave it to a teaching assistant. Now, most professors have teaching assistants. You may also be knowing of people who were teaching assistants to fund part of their expenses of learning in USA. And he gave this to the teaching assistant so that it can be typed and distributed to the students and so. Typewriters existed because they have been there from 1890 or so. So the teaching assistant also knows physics. He looks at all those questions and said, but professor, these are exactly the same questions you gave to the same students 1 year ago. How can you do that? And Einstein said, you are right. The questions are the same, but the answers have changed. Now, last year's situation is so reflective of this. Questions are the same. What do we teach? How do we teach? Where do we teach? Who teaches? How do we assess? Is the teaching relevant or not? So the same 5-6 questions from times immemorial are there, but the answers have changed and we are still trying to find the answers. In fact, to a large extent, this session is also in aid of finding that answer. So these are some. Now, if you want to say what are the big changes that have happened, and I will first say that briefly, then we can elaborate it. To me, there are 3 very important things that we should realize. One is acceleration. So we are in an era of acceleration. Now, you don't have to go very far to look at this. You just look at the population growth from whatever point of time in history you want to choose to the present time and projected into 2100. You know that for millions of years, the population was less than 1 million. It reached 1 billion at about AD 1000. And then, you know, it started rapidly growing. So just do any Google of population growth curve and you see this is an accelerating curve. Now, long time ago, Malthus drew attention to this. And Malthus had said that we will have a serious crisis because the population is growing exponentially, but land and agriculture cannot grow exponentially. They can only grow linearly, and therefore we will have a food crisis. He predicted this towards the 19th century or something. Malthus was proved wrong because of advances in the field called chemistry. So till we depended upon natural sources for our food, we had to depend upon fixation of nitrogen because all proteins are created by nitrogen from the air being fixated. So they were done either in plants or in animals who ate the plants, and these were our 2 sources of proteins. What Haber did with a chemical process was to make ammonia out of the nitrogen in the air and oxygen, and then Fritz Haber made it an industrial process so we could get the fertilizers, and therefore the agriculture problem was actually solved. And we had what I said, abundance then. So one is acceleration. And this acceleration applies to everything else. Therefore, building of houses, building of cities, building of schools, building of this thing, finding, everything is growing at a very fast rate. And mathematicians use the word exponential for this, but basically what we are saying is we are in an accelerated rate of growth. The second thing is abundance. That we are finding now that more and more, I mean, if you look around and any one of you admits to being old enough to realize that when we were young, there weren't that many things. I mean, for most of my youth, there were only 2 cars, Ambassador and Fiat, and there was a 10-year waiting line for it. Today, you see new cars being launched ever so often. There was only 2 scooters, Lambretta and Vespa. And now you see every other day, new scooter is being launched, and Amitabh Bachchan is promoting it, and so on and so forth. So it is not, so this is and those who are familiar with the computer field know how technology has moved so that something which was very difficult to have a mobile phone or a cellular phone or a TV now is with everybody. So much so that you say, don't bring mobile phone to school, keep the mobile phone in, and so on and so forth. Now, This is the other big thing. So acceleration, abundance. And the third thing is automation. So what has happened is increasingly more and more automation is happening. Things which were done by humans or low-level machines are now being done by automated machines. I mean, you just recall, again, if you care to admit that you are old enough, that once upon a time you had to go to a bank to cash your check, go through several counters, etc. And then if you got your money, you were very grateful. Today, you just go to an ATM and you press some buttons and everything happens. This is happening in more and more fields. We can keep giving examples. So this is the kind of thing. So when we are looking at what changes are happening, what we have to be ready for, and why I'm saying this is because if you look at the very first one, acceleration, the number of people we have to teach is growing at a very fast rate. It is no longer like what it was or double of it or triple. And 23% of the world's children still are not able to go to school. And I'm also saying, because we have this, this slogan nowadays that Apada mein avsar dhoondna. Now, if 23% of the world's children don't have a school, can India pitch in and provide schools for them? Dr. Hasiza just now said that you could create a school with all kinds of people, influence all over, and so on. So India with its very good education system. So when I say good education system, I mean the best of Indian education is world class. It is not uniformly scaled because of various constraints. But every management institute you see today, the dean will be a person of Indian origin. Every IT company you will see, most important people will be of Indian origin. So the best of Indian education is the best of the world. It is not scaled. Now, the challenge therefore is, if we can scale Indian education, we can meet the needs of Indians also and of the rest of the world also. And that is why it is very important to do serious attention to how we can do a good education, which we know, and scale it. It should not be just a few islands of excellence that IIT and IIM and St. Stephen's and so on and so forth is there, but it should be reachable to. So that is why it is so interesting to really, in a sense, quote unquote, solve the problem of education. Because, and I will share with you, broadly we already know that as the population gets more educated, the economy improves. And there's a Stanford professor who has a book on this called The Knowledge Capital of Nations. Just like Adam Smith had created a book called The Wealth of Nations, Eric Hanushek is a professor of Stanford. He created a book called The Knowledge Capital of Nations. And the key premise he says is that when individuals are educated, when regions are educated, when countries are educated, they're high on the economic scale. We know, for example, if you look at Silicon Valley, the education, etc., is of a much higher order on the average than the rest of the world. So it is the future depends upon good education, future-ready education, and scalable education. There is no point in creating one institute of excellence where 100 people are given when we are a country of 132 crores. So we should be able to provide the best education, the world-class education to almost everybody. And I think what Hasiza ji was saying was absolutely right. And you can say in theory, you could do it. And that means many others could do it. And this will be the sort of golden era of Indian education, because it will help us as well as the rest of the world also, which is in, let us say, worse condition than us. So this is something, and you can ask more questions and I'll give you more responses.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So you have mentioned the challenges, the obesity, population and education. And then you also mentioned the accelerated pace, rate of growth, abundance and automation. They are another set of challenges, new things which we are going to face. May I request Sunita ma'am to please ask your question?
Yeah, I would go back to Mukta ma'am, what sir said initially about the scientific temper. Now this is when we are bringing our children in the classroom, we are trying to generate that scientific temper and the ability to ask a question. And we also know if a set of textbooks is there for us, it stays for a couple of years, right? Like the next revised edition when it comes. By that time, we have to stick to that, right? So basically, my question to you, sir, is what is the message you would give to the teachers so that that scientific temper is sparked in the minds of young children? If you could
Well,
guide us on that.
I think what you've done is raised a very important question, because this term scientific temper has not been understood. What had happened in the name of scientific temper, they started forcing science on people, which got them even more uninterested in science because it was being forced upon them. And when you look at the qualities of a scientific temper or scientific thinking or scientific approach, they are curiosity, right? Seeking answers, not being satisfied with the answers, seeking better answers. Right? And all these are qualities of an entrepreneur and innovator. Because we look at science, we make it, the science teacher creates a problem. But if you look at the scientific approach, that's the innovator's approach. In fact, today, one of the most successful persons is Elon Musk. And Elon Musk emphasizes, he says, I'm a businessman later. I'm a scientist first. I am exploring. So this is how he started about these batteries. He said, why are batteries so expensive? What is there in a battery which makes it so expensive? What does the battery do? And he had the courage to ask such radical questions that can't I have a rocket which will come back to where, like an aeroplane comes back? Till now, we had rockets which were one way. You just sent a rocket, it was there, it was somewhere, this thing, and went in some ocean. He had the audacity to say, if airplanes can come back, why can't rockets come back? And we just now saw that this Virgin person, Richard Branson, has just been on a trip to space and come back. Earlier, it wasn't so. Earlier, the thing was done, and then it would fall somewhere in the Pacific Ocean or Atlantic Ocean, etc. So the point is very important that we need to create that thing. And one of the important things that I want to say is that science is not a settled field. Every day you could be creative. So the moment you apply a scientific approach to something, it will become science. So, for example, the ancient sciences were astronomy, right? Then you can call physics, then chemistry. But what happened later? You have geology, earth science, you have life sciences, you have psychology is considered science, economics is considered a science. In the list of original Nobel Prizes, economics was not there because Alfred Nobel did not think economics was a science. Only a few years ago, economics has been included in the set of Nobel Prizes, and Amartya Sen has got it in our recent thing, Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee and so on. So the point is, science is evolving. And the thing that we must tell young people, you could be creating a science. In fact, medicine was not seen as a science. In fact, there's a book called The Youngest Science, and that is about medicine. He says medicine till about 150, 200 years was more or less tona totka and doctors' good manners to keep people level. But like we say for terminal diseases, that we can do nothing, we can just help you die peacefully. That is what doctors were able to do because they didn't know anything. And as you know, DNA is discovered just like 1953 or so. Antibiotics about 100 years ago. Jenner's work, Pasteur's work is just about 100 years ago. And our own civilization is 5,000, 10,000 years old. So all this is very recent, and there is scope for newer and newer science. So scientific temper is an important thing, and this will be done by picking people and let them do anything and try to find out patterns and cause and effect and challenge. It's also part of, in a sense, critical thinking, because you will challenge false hypotheses. And the beauty of science is, and especially science versus authority, that nothing is final. So in science, you are only till your theory and data match, you are okay. The day a new theory comes, you can be out. The day new data comes, you can be out. And the best story that I like on this is that Father Thomson got the Nobel Prize for showing that the electron is a particle. And his son Thomson got a Nobel Prize for showing that electron is a wave. And de Broglie got a Nobel Prize for saying electron is neither particle nor wave. And this is when we make progress. So this is the beauty about science. It is a perpetual quest for truth. And everything that you have is for now. For now, this is what we know. And let me tell you that physics is one of the strongest science. But even in physics, they say we don't know about 90% of what is called dark matter, dark energy, etc., etc. Whatever we know is just about a small percentage of this thing. So that's why it's very exciting.
Yeah.
Very
Thank
well
you, sir. Thank you. I
Thank you
think
so much.
wonderfully, sir has answered. And I think we can proudly say that even cooking is a science.
Yeah, yeah.
Science and scientific temperament, they're two
Most
different
delightful one.
and that is how we nowadays we see the ice cream parlors and hairstyle clinics. So because everything is being, if we see from that perspective of scientific temperament, then everything has science or the scientific temperament in it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So let me also add here very quickly that now that you mentioned about food being a science, now if you look at the chemistry, sugar is C6H12O6, alcohol is C2H5OH, acetic acid or vinegar is CH3COOH. So these are all basically scientific elements, and you know, if you are a good winemaker, if you don't do it properly, it will turn into vinegar and get all wasted and destroyed. So
Rachna ma'am, Hasija sir warned me, don't let Rachna ma'am ask a question to Pant sir, but still I'll do. I'll get back to you later. First, I'll ask Ritu Ranjan ma'am to please ask a question to sir.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's always a pleasure listening, MM Pant sir. Like, I'm a big fan of yours, sir. Since I'm an IT person, so I would like to relate this sustainable communities and societies with the ITs. And I know you're also an IT person. So, sir, the mobility of people and goods in the global era is being restricted greatly due to the COVID-19. And the issues of sustainability and inclusion at the global level are becoming more than ever.
yeah, continue.
So how do you think technology help all stratas of the society in mitigating economic impact and initiate recovery from this pandemic?
You see, the point is very simple. As you know, you're an IT person. You can solve a problem if somebody tells you what is the problem. Unfortunately, in the pandemic, nobody knows how to deal with the pandemic. And whether it is normal computing or artificial intelligence, none of them will create a solution from the beginning. You tell them that this is what I want to do, this is what I want to make happen, then it can tell you the calculations as to how it can happen. But the problem today is that we don't know how to develop. You know, there is debate between locking down and not locking. So how much locking should you? Now they are doing this 50% here, 20% there, 30% there. That's no design. So first you have to have a framework. See, the progress in science happens by having an assumption, working on that assumption, validating that assumption with the data, and then correcting and moving on. Now, if there is no framework at all, in fact, this happens in many fields. It is not only this thing. If you look at how our brain works, you're talking IT and AI, even how our brain works, nobody has even got a framework for it. That what exactly are the elements of it and how does it work and so on. In a famous book called Thomas Kuhn, called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, he has a phrase called paradigm and paradigm shift. So science does not progress by like great insights which you have to know. They keep on working on a certain field. Then there is a thing, then there is a change, like in your own IT, your or whatever. In IT, for example, we first had programming languages, assembly languages, then we had high order languages, then we had Fortran, COBOL, what are they called, third generation language. Then we had fourth generation languages, which were SQL and database and so on. So we created database. So then we moved from file to database. So earlier there were file you met, now you had database. Then you create relational database, third normal form, etc., etc. Then you created search techniques which could do that. Unfortunately, with respect to the epidemic, we haven't reached anything where a systematic model can be tried. We can only keep on looking at trial and error, and more often than not, it is wrong because you have no basis for it. Now, if you're going to do something without a basis, it is not likely to work. So this is where the limitation of IT comes in. that IT can solve a problem which is complex to solve, but the understanding is clear what we want to do. And it is difficult to do by hand, so the machine does it. But if we have no idea as to what to do, and let me tell you, nobody has been able to tell you that what kind of a virus sort of, is, what makes it spread, what makes it not spread. But we are just hoping that this will spread, this will not spread, mutant, this will alpha, beta, gamma, something. But do you have a theory to say this will spread, this will not? Like in chemistry, knowing the chemical structure, you can say this will have these properties. In physics, you can say this will be a good conductor, bad conductor, etc. It will be lighter than air, heavier than air, it will fly, float, whatever. But we have no idea in biology today of that kind of an approach. Even what makes a virus inactive, we have really no idea. In a real fundamental sense, so that you can actually solve it. We are still observing. We're still observing various kinds of things and correlating. The problem is that there is a very well-known principle that correlation is not causation. So two things can be correlated, but they may not be the cause of each other. So this is actually, in the fallacy thing, it is called ergo hoc propter hoc. There are many things that can be correlated, but that doesn't mean it is the cause of each other. So between the various, right now they're still seeing correlations. Those who had COVID also had this. Those who had this had this. They're only doing, they don't know what is the cause and what is an effect. And that itself is a long time. But the hope is that if we keep the scientific spirit alive, you will start creating those models, just like for chemistry and other material science, we can predict the properties of materials by their structure. We'll be able to predict the properties of biological organisms based on their structure and properties.
So the correlation may not be the causation.
Ma'am, can I ask one more
yes,
question?
please continue.
Since you have just said about AI, artificial intelligence, so as per, according to this goal 11 of this SDG goal, one of the goals, like which targets and ensures that by 2030, everyone will be provided safe, affordable, accessible, sustainable systems. And we all know that today AI is being used in all walks of life.
Yeah.
So do you think with AI, will the AI be the safest tool in developing sustainable cities and communities? And can we, the more focus is, can we totally depend on the machines with artificial intelligence where those are to be trained and fed to complete any kind of a task?
Yeah. See, the point is that two things. One is a problem can be solved, but is it going to be solved in the context of the situation? So for example, even medicine, there are so many diseases whose cure is well known, but in a certain area, it may not be known. So if you're a patient where doctors don't know cures for your diseases exist, you are going to suffer. Between AI and non-AI, there is no doubt that AI is superior, does better, and there is more and more stories of success of AI. So there is absolutely nothing. There is almost, very soon you will find, there is almost no area where humans will be doing better than AI. So that is there. So that is the thing. But the point is that something which is solvable but still is not done is a matter of execution in the context that we talk. There are so many situations where solutions are well known, especially in health science, in economic science, and so on. The solutions are known, but the society or the social group is not doing that. For example, we all know education is a solution towards growth and prosperity, but we are not doing enough on that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ritu ma'am, for asking the question. So the challenges from obesity, population education, acceleration rate of growth, abundance and automation, and AI. Now I'll request Anubha Srivastava ma'am, HOS from Delhi International School, EDGE, to please ask your question.
Thank you, ma'am. Sir, I am actually in love with the three ACEs that you have highlighted: the abundance, automation, and acceleration, and all the three clubbed together, I think, are the foundations to what we see today, obesity as the major problem. And
Yeah,
my
continue.
students and my teachers, both of them have been raising this concern. When the school was briefly allowed to call senior students, the first thing that my students asked was, "Ma'am, can you allow us one small bracket to play because we don't get to play?" And today also they keep on asking, what can we do? The parents keep on asking, what can we do? Because most of the time we are glued to screens. Everything is happening on the artificial mode. So how do we cater to this? Because the more
Yeah,
we
but
move
the
towards-
answer is, see, let me first say, the answer to obesity is eating less. There is no amount of exercise you can do to melt all that you have eaten. Because if you ask your physics teacher, they will tell you the mechanical equivalent of heat is not such. So if you eat one laddu, the amount of walking you will have to do to neutralize the calories is very high. So you cannot reduce or not be obese by trying to do more exercise. It has to be by eating less. The input has to be less. Opportunities for exercises exist all the time. We do every house. You can walk, you can jump, you can run, you can do all kinds of things. So the modern gyms are a fad which have been created, that where you go to raise yourself. What prevents you from jumping up and down the stairs in your own house? What prevents you from doing, see, you are going to do stretch exercises, this, that, do the dishes in your house, do the floor mopping on your house, carry something from the thing, wash your clothes and spread the clothes. So there is no dearth of movement. In fact, humans were designed for movement, and that is why some of this problem is coming. But for obesity, it is very clear that you must have an idea of the glycemic index of the food that you are eating. And it is not how many calories it had. That is what you have to look at. And therefore, as they said, you look at the more important micronutrients, the proteins and the fiber and nutrients that you have to do. And what I call macronutrients, fat and carbohydrate is something which has to be reduced. And much of it can be reduced because this is a thing that we have created because we have started getting pleasure out of that. Now, if we kind of try to get pleasure out of other things, which need not be smoking and drinking, but then you can find that you will be better off. Otherwise, you are off sugar but into alcohol. It is not very much different because then you have other aspects.
So
It's all a matter of habit.
Adopting new realities that has given the challenge as well as solution of how to control the obesity. Now, there was a question in the chat box, how to develop the scientific temperament in the online classes or the virtual classes. And I'll add on to this, suggest some ways. What are the new challenges technologically in the field of education we are expecting, and what are the solutions?
Okay.
Can you
So very quickly, how to develop a scientific temper in the online world is actually a very good both thing, because in the earlier world it was not so. So one of the things about scientific temper is curiosity questions. So in the online world, there are so many platforms where you can ask questions. Quora is one of the very well-known ones, Quora. Lots of people ask questions on Quora and some people answer them. Lots of people have their blogs, etc. You can answer those questions. You just put the question on Google itself. You will get lots of resources which will start trying to tell you the answer. And when you start looking at various answers, you can go into them further and then figure out which of them are plausible, which are not. There are lots of ways. In fact, Carl Sagan, again a very famous scientist and science computer, had what he called the Balloonie kit. He said how to identify when somebody is talking nonsense or bullshit or whatever, because you can, he said, first begin with who the person is. Does he have an agenda? What are his sources? Who else kind of looks at him, and so on and so forth. So it is a very good thing. The internet is a very good thing, including you can see YouTube videos on how to have a scientific temper. In fact, I saw a video very recently of a science teacher who said, I've been a science teacher for 20 years and I had completely wrong ideas about science. And I feel sorry that it is those wrong ideas that I've been telling my students for the last 12 years and so on. And only when I went and did a real project, project-based learning, etc., then I understood how scientists think, how scientists work, and so on and so forth. Now, the second thing that you said about challenges which is related to technology, let me first share with you, this is something I've been saying, apart from Einstein's story, this is a book which I've been talking to people about for this. It's called The Fourth Education Revolution by Anthony Seldon, and is a book which every educator must read for their own survival as well as flourishing and prosperity. Why Anthony Seldon is an interesting character is that he is just retired as Vice Chancellor of Buckingham University, but he was also the head of 2 schools, Wellington and something else. And the book is an excellent book, which talks about very pragmatic thing. It doesn't talk big philosophy. He said, so what does a teacher do in class? These are the 5 things which a teacher does in class. How will AI help in doing that? What does a student do while learning? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How will AI help in doing these things? And he talks not only of AI, but he talks about many other technologies, because when we talk about the Education 4.0, in fact, in that book on page 33, I think he specifically says Education 4.0 and says, what does it mean? It does not mean just Zoom or WhatsApp. He talks about it meaning Internet of Things, talks of blockchain, 3D printing, AR, VR, and number of 10, 12 things which all go into this. So this is what people have to be aware of and learn and be able to benefit with that. So are you using AR in your teaching learning? Are you using VR in teaching learning? And one of the very important things which I suggested, at first experience it yourself. So I suggested to some schools at some point to create a small new technologies experience center. So we either start teaching it or we have no idea. But let there be a emerging technologies experience center where there is some AR gadgetry, there is some Oculus Rift with VR, there is something else where people are looking at, so they can experience what it is and not be intimidated by it or feel that this has been thrust upon them. So some people will like 3D printing. So it doesn't have to be until there is a course on 3D printing or a tinkering lab is doing something, I will not do that. Get a 3D printer, get that experience, get excited about it, and see how it is going to happen. But back to the original thing, acceleration. These things are going to change very fast. And we are actually right now in probably the slowest changing period of your life. Everything in future is going to be faster, whether you are young or old, it does not matter. I mean, you imagine, I was talking to you about population, you imagine till October 1957, there was no such thing as a satellite. Only people who studied physics calculated escape velocity, that when the initial velocity becomes more than 7 miles per second or 11.2 kilometers per second, then there is escape velocity. It was a purely theoretical concept. I also studied it in school and many others studied. It was in 57 that Russians first put up that thing called Sputnik, which did the escape velocity part. So this is another important point, that we may know how to solve a problem, but actually solving it requires the technology and the infrastructure and everything. Till Russians put up a Sputnik, US was ahead in technology. They made the atom bomb, they made the hydrogen bomb, they were ahead of everything. And they thought Russians kind of steal our technology and then go. But when they put the Sputnik, then they could not have stolen it from us. And then when John Kennedy became president in 1960, his inaugural speech was, within 10 years, we will take a man on the moon and bring him back. And Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon on, I think, 20th July 1969 or so. Just imagine how fast. And now what happened yesterday when Branson went to outer space, etc., was completely impossible. It was conceptually impossible that you could just go to space. We had in our mythology, there is a person or object called Trishanku who got stuck in there and it was neither here nor there and so on. But we never thought that we could actually do this. And I tell the young people, when I look at young children, I say, you are the generation who will go to the moon for your honeymoon. and you will go to the Mars for your 25th anniversary of your wedding. Because see, this is what is, imagine a child in class 1. So by the time he is 21 or 25, moon ride will be available. It won't be only for billionaires, it will be for other people as well. So
Thank you so much, Rachna ma'am. Over to you. Although you have a Granth at home, but on this platform, would you like to ask a question?
Well, I have been hearing Professor, and there is one thing that I see that he has been saying time and time again in this 1 hour discussion, and that is acceleration and acceleration and acceleration. Now, I would like to know from him that if there is acceleration and there is something that children have to learn because it's an accelerated thing. So how do we make our children future ready? Because things by the whatever we will teach will become obsolete. So that's what you have been saying. So that's what I would like to know. So what should we teach how should we make our children future ready?
And the answer to that is accelerated learning. See, the answer is well known and people have been talking about it. You have to see, we take 12 years to learn something. We take 4 years to do something in a university. Why can't that 4 years be compressed to 6 months, 3 months, 2 months, whatever? This is what all technology is about. Technology is about acceleration and doing things much faster than what they ever done before. Right from steam engine to petrol engine to diesel engine to electric engine to now space technologies or your own computer. All of us remember that, let's say about 10 years ago, just getting internet connection was a big thing. You could never even think of actually video conferencing from your home or home the way we are doing now. So the answer is accelerated learning using technology, accelerated learning using AI. And there are people who have given full frameworks for this. And this has been done in experiments where people have learned. When you define that this is what I want to learn, this is the time in which it has to be learned, the technology allows you to learn it much faster.
So there is one little question added to this, is that if it is accelerated learning, there is what is called a syllabus is there. And then you are sort of in that. So if you start accelerating it, how would we sort of balance it with the children?
No, you have to give up on the syllabus. See, what is happening is, we know that all subjects have a continuum. So from KG to PG, as they say, is a continuum. You teach the same history at class 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10. So if we don't have the syllabus constrained to a class, you just have stages of learning. Just like in our normal life and growing, we are children, then grown-up adults, then this thing, and people go at different stages, the aging or the progress, etc. And what will happen is in different subjects, so somebody may be in maths at the same level, what you might call grade level. But in music, may be way ahead of it. In history, may be way behind. Something else. And let this be the report card, rather than best of 3 subjects, 5 subjects, syllabus constraint, and so on and so forth. And that is done. So
I think wonderfully answered by Sir. And Sir has very beautifully explained that once we are talking about the accelerated speed or the accelerated pace, we should not think of education in the brackets of age group and in the brackets of classes, class nomenclature, rather the grades wise, grade level 1, level 2, level wise. So Dr. Pandey shared in the previous episode that for adapting or integrating the new things in all organizations, we should have the policies, procedure, and practices. So can I request Dr. Pandey to please share? There is one question in the chat box. I'm relating it with that if we are using AI or these augmented realities, are they a threat to the natural thinking? Dr. Pandey? Is not there?
Mukta ji, namaste. Since you have brought me in the discussion, you have to allow me to say a couple of things other than what you are asking. I'll come to that, but let me first congratulate you that in this show, you have created a history where for the first time publicly, Mrs. Pant has asked a question to Professor Pant. And it has not happened so far, I can tell you that, to the best of my knowledge, because Rachna Pant is my senior from the university, and Professor Pant is my intellectual senior and mentor. So I know both of them. So you deserve congratulations, Muktaji.
Thank you, sir.
So this is number one. Number two, I am very tempted to take a question which Rituji asked Professor Pant. And since that is an area I'm very, very deeply wedded to, and therefore I'm doing a little bit of transgression. And very briefly, I'll tell you, she asked about AI's role in attaining sustainable developmental goals. And she particularly asked about goal number 11, just as an example. Now, the researchers have proved so far that out of the 17 goals and 169 targets, all these 17 goals have 169 targets. Out of these 134 targets, user cases have already been formed to help it through AI. Now, so say, for example, goal number 11, and if you want sustainable cities and communities, and if we switch over to electrical cars, and AI will help us a great deal, I think we will reduce the carbon footprint to a great deal, right? So that is one way how AI will help. But at the same time, there are almost 60 cases where AI is going to play a negative role. I think that is the challenge that we will face. And how it will play a negative role, I'll give you one example of that also. A very popular thing happening in the world is about cryptocurrency applications, the Bitcoin. And you know, the amount of electricity that Bitcoin uses, I think that is the total electrical consumption of many countries in the world, right? And that will seriously hamper goal number 7, affordable energy for all. So that is the balance. And that is where this value education will come in the picture, okay? Because technology is value neutral and the value will be added by human beings. And that is why skills, knowledge, and values, they are interrelated. So that is something very, very important in my opinion. So this is one comment I thought I will ask. The second is your question, Muktaji. Of course, you know, for anything you need a good policy, right? And any policy is useless if it is not implemented, right? And you cannot implement anything in the vacuum, so you need a policy. So that could be dangerous. So any implementation in the absence of a policy will be dangerous. And a good policy not implemented will be useless. So that is why we have to make a balance there also. So this is the second thing. The third thing is one person asked virtual classes, how will we develop scientific temper? Professor Pant has already answered it beautifully, but I have a take on this that perhaps the person has in the mind that it is very difficult to develop scientific temper in the virtual classes. I think whatever we can do in the in-person classes, we can do it in the virtual classes also, you see? So you have to design something, right? You have to design the project, the problem, the thinking environment. It can be done, you know, you make small groups, you use the chat box, you use the breakout sessions, you bring in asynchronous activities and you bring them virtually to give a presentation. So it can be done. I mean, theoretically it can be done and practically it has been implemented also. So therefore, Muktaji, you have brought me at a very wrong time because I have a very, very special question to Professor Pant. And Professor Pant, you talked about you know, food shortage, and probably you are linking it with the acceleration in the human population. Now the current data on hunger is that in the world today, there are 800 million people who are hungry. And this number is 10 to 15% more due to COVID. But the food production in the last many years has gone up by 300%. So is the rising population only reason for this hunger? Or there are many other factors which we should bring in to solve the food problem or the hunger problem? That's the question. You are muted, sir. Yeah.
Because you say food is so much and per person it is so much, but actually is the distribution and access.
Yes.
And all of us who are of this age know that there was this famous Bengal famine, which was a human created famine. It was not that the food was not there. So this is distribution issues, and this will be, you can blame it on capitalism, you can blame it on various things and power structures and so on and so forth. But from a, as I said to another person, it is a solved problem, solvable problem. Now, whether we do it and act on it or not is a different issue. So just like I talked about various health issues where the cure is known, but you don't have access to the cure. Similarly, when we are saying today, because of technology, there's enough food production and people who have access to food are getting obese, and there are people who are being denied of that. And that is also a reality. This is a bigger issue, and this is an issue about how humanity will work together. Even today, every day, today we are talking about vaccine inequities, that the poor countries have no access to vaccine. And they are not likely to get access to vaccine for another 2-3 years. So these are other issues. They are very important issues, but they're issues of organization of human societies.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you,
Dr.
sir.
Ji, over to you.
May I request Dr. Hasija to please share, like class 12 is now going out of the schools. So what will be your message, or what are the steps you're taking in the schools for adapting the new realities?
My apology. I would like to ask a question to Professor Pant, who is right now the key speaker, rather than responding to this query.
Okay.
Professor, my query to you, and it has two segments of that. Number one, we commonly say that trial and error method is a step towards learning, and it reinforces learning for a lifelong.
Okay.
Whereas AI-enabled learning modules doesn't scope for the trial and error. So isn't it using AI is harmful for the children? And second, as a teacher, on one hand, we are talking about scientific temperament. On the other hand, we have AI available to us, which is available to children also. How do I change my role as a traditional teacher to a facilitator so that learning happens and it happens for lifelong? Over to you, sir.
Okay, very good. So, see, firstly, as you said, there is, in fact, this is the big fundamental question. Trial and error is how we evolved. Took millions of years of Darwinian evolution, trial and error, survival of the fittest, and so on to do that. We now say that now that humans have evolved intelligence, they can take intelligence. So some people attribute intelligent design to God itself, but otherwise they say these are man-made materials and so on. In fact, this year, 2020, was especially important because this is the beginning of what is called the Anthropocene era. Now, Anthropocene era is a word which is in the geological terminology. As you know, till now, and even today sometime, we are inferior to nature, and the forces of nature are much more powerful. But now we are getting men making more and more things, structures, creatures, and so on, which are man-made. And Anthropocene is called where man-made become more powerful than erstwhile nature. And this year, the amount of material that humans have created, the mass they have created, is more than the natural biomass which was ever created. So that is one part. So the issue is very simple. So rather than trial and error, what AI does, AI looks for patterns. Now, when AI looks for patterns, it therefore is able to fast track the thing. So what it has is, it looks at the past data and tries to find out patterns in the data. And I think it is worthwhile spending some time to explain why AI has become. See, the earlier stages of AI looked at how humans think and tried to mimic them. So they were called expert systems, rule-based expert systems, and we have programming languages like Prolog and Lisp, etc., in which we would program those. But that wasn't very successful because it is not easy to identify all the rules that we use. So you may see it. So what the new age AI did, and this came from big data, data science, and so on, they said, let's just take the raw data. Forget how the human interprets it. And when I have the raw data, what patterns can I find in it? And this is where big data, data science started coming. And we use the same things which we normally use with small data and doing by hand, that this is a large amount of data, there are many possible parameters, 100 possible parameters, and then the machines try to do what is the best fit of that. So they have no idea of why this happens, but they know that this is what is happening. So in science, for example, it's the difference between kinematics and dynamics. In kinetics, we know this is how it is happening. But dynamics, these are the forces which are making it happen. So if you do kinetics without knowing dynamics, you could be right, but you could always be wrong. Because if you don't really know what are the causes and factors, etc. And this is the problem today. So we are hoping that if we have more and more data, our results will be better. But if we have not understood the causes, we are not going to be able to do it. So wherever the kinetics do not throw a surprise about the dynamics, then there is my simple example that I give, you throw a body up. Now you will see it is going up, 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 up. So you will think it's continuing to go up, but after a while it starts coming down because the dynamics is now bringing it down. Now in AI, again, the same problem happens, that where the problem is such that you are not able to understand the thing, you may go for a incorrect or a wrong answer. That's why we still don't trust AI fully. But where you have trusted it for a while and you repeat it for similar situations, then you will get it. So if the conditions in which you are using to predict are somewhat similar to the data that you provided to create the model, you will be better. So that is the basic thing. Is there any other thing you had wanted to know on this?
I just wanted to know that how the change in role of a teacher.
Okay, very good. So yeah, that is a very, so let me do this very interesting, and I think you've triggered a very appropriate time, this response. They're coming towards the end. You see, when you hear the word computer, what do you think? A human or a machine? You think a machine, right? But this was not always so. In the 1950s, computers were humans and they were largely girls. And I would urge you to read a book or watch a TED talk called When Computers Were Human. Now, these girls were actually very bright. They had done BSc or MSc with mathematics. And they worked for reputed scientists to do large number of calculations by hand or by those manual calculators that happen. Now, it is easy to say the equation of the trajectory of this is this. Now, how long will it take to calculate it for 10 degrees, 15 degrees, air resistance, no air resistance? So hundreds and hundreds of human computers worked in things like Jet Propulsion Lab, NASA, etc., in the early days of this thing. Now, it's very interesting. You may not appreciate it because we take it for granted, but I will get to school level things. In school, you are taught the area of a circle is pi r square. Now, given the radius of a circle, how will you calculate the area? We think it is very simple. We'll put pi 22 upon 7, but pi is not 22 upon 7. Pi is an infinite series. If you want to calculate it accurately, you need this human computer to keep on calculating till the stage. The perimeter of a circle S to pi r. How would you calculate? So you are talking of a planet going around or something. And ellipse, it is even worse. For ellipse, the area is pi ab upon 4. But there is no formula for perimeter. You cannot say pi upon 2 or pi a squared. There is no simple formula for the perimeter. And these simple things require calculation, and pi, which we assume 22 is also an infinite series. This is why there were a large number of human calculators which are required. Around 1955, when the first ENIAC came, the ENIAC was seen as something very fast. In 3 seconds, it could do what a human calculator took 3 hours to do. So ENIAC came, then others came, and now, of course, you know, you have all these things. Why I am saying this? So the people who were computers got eliminated by machines, but scientists and researchers continued to be there. And they use these computers as devices to help them. Now, you imagine a future book being written when teachers were humans. And if human won't write it, an AI will write that book when teachers were humans. But what will that doesn't mean teaching will go away. These real issues about teaching, the questions I said, what are we teaching for? What is the purpose? And if you go back to Bloom's taxonomy, the purpose of teaching is not the lower levels. It is the higher levels of analysis and creation and creativity. Now we are wanting creativity from everybody. We are not interested if you can write the same formula which was written 300 years ago and your father and grandfather both learned in school. No, we say, now that you know the formula, what can you do? And this is going to be the role of the teacher. So human teachers will continue to lead the goal, the direction, the purpose, the limitations. And most important is when we are looking at anything, what don't we know yet? I mentioned earlier that even the biggest physicists say that 90% of dark matter, dark energy, we don't know. That is what makes progress. The day you say, I know everything, there's going to be no progress. So the role of the educator is to push that frontiers. So you know this, but you don't know this. You know this, but you don't know this. Now for routine things which are written in 10,000 textbooks, etc., you have chatbots. Even today, I used to do this demo very often. I will have an Alexa with me and I say, Alexa, what is artificial intelligence? And Alexa will read out the definition of artificial intelligence from Wikipedia. And so many of straightforward question answers are going to be, even at the lower level, the first 3 levels of Bloom's taxonomy, the automation will be able to do it. But the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy is what you have to do. And this is why it will become even more important. And if you recall what I said in the beginning, now the problems are much bigger, much more difficult. We are not talking of simple projectiles. We're talking of climate change. We're talking of global economic distortion. We're talking of food crisis or whatever. So your education has to be more powerful to be able to do that. Interestingly, it is going to be maths at a lot. Somebody asked, what are you telling your class 12 students to do? In another interview, I read of the CEO of D-Wave, a quantum computing company in Canada. That CEO was telling, tell your class 12 students to learn the algebra that is taught in university. This is what accelerated learning is about. It is not about just completing the syllabus. It's about completing the syllabus and some more. And the desire to more and more. Anyway, I'll stop at that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So much of the wisdom. I actually had 2 liters of water while listening to you. I mean, it's just amazing.
And I don't want to say
It's beyond my capacity to consolidate. So I'll request Professor Chaudhary to please consolidate the session. And the one-liner I would also like to know how universities, how IITs are preparing to welcome students to adapt the new realities. Over to Harish sir.
Well, Mukta ma'am, once again, congratulations and thank you. But I wasn't prepared for this, if I may say, googly that you have just thrown to. I have been listening to Professor Pant over the last 10 years. My first conference at IIT, Professor Pant had the entire audience in rapt attention. The topic that probably he took and probably is extremely vast but extremely interesting. If I may call it the foundation of science, the foundations of science. And if I may also say application of science, what the future holds. I'm going to skip the second part of your mandate, how IITs are preparing students, looking forward to students. No, I don't think that's appropriate at this point of time. We will not get into higher education frame here. But a fascinating session, fascinating discussion, starting from what Professor Pant summed up as the problems of acceleration, abundance, getting on to AI, the future of AI. I remember Professor Pant once asked me to see a video, which I have often shown to other teachers. Humans need not apply. What a fascinating one. But then I also must quickly add, and probably sir may agree or not. When I was in school, rather college, and IIT Kanpur first year, when using IBM 7044, I read a book, Limits to Growth by Club of Rome, who did some massive calculations. So a group of Nobel laureates who came together to predict the problems of the future. And they looked at food production, they looked at population growth, pollution, and consumption patterns of non-renewable materials. And they made a number of predictions, and I was pretty upset about it. Now I look back as a 16-year-old young student, my first year BTech, I was pretty upset. It said things like we'll run out of petrol by the year 2000 and out of zinc by 2015 and so on and so forth. But two things about it. One, at end they said, however, this will not happen. Technologies will change, patterns will change. At the same time, it's a matter of concern. Two, I went to my father and asked him, we used to call him Bauji, कि Bauji, ये सब खत्म हो जाएगा तो क्या करेंगे? He said, we lived in the villages without all this, didn't we? So whether it is a circular approach or will the acceleration continue, or I frankly have no idea. And when we read the Indian scriptures, we always say, at end, come back to the beginning. And space curves into itself. So maybe the problems seem great. The human race has survived. Maybe it will. Maybe there'll be better technology solutions. Maybe there'll be better social solutions. So it was a fascinating session, sir. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Over to you, Mukta.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Very limited words, you have actually consolidated the things. So I am just recollecting a cartoon by Archie's, which was being drawn a couple of years back, where the parents, they are seeing a child learning at home and teacher is teaching on the television, because at that time laptops etc. were not there. And the cartoon stated that we never had these types of facilities when the child was having education at home. So, and Professor Pant has referred to when teachers were human. So the time has come when the child is having education at home, having teacher at their home. But do remember, whatever are the realities, whatever the new things they will come up, but teachers will remain teachers, and teachers will remain as human. There will never be an AI, something we'll call once upon a time, AI were the teachers. So thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Pant, for such an enlightening session. Thank you, Dr. Pandey, Dr. Seja, Dr. Harish, Ritu Ranjan ma'am from Indraprastha Paschim Vihar School, Sunita Rajiv ma'am, Elcon International School, and Anubha Srivastava ma'am from Delhi International School. Thank you so much. And of course, Rachana Pant ma'am, it was really, I'm really indebted that at the last moment you accepted the offer to grace this talk show. Thank you very much for being here. So for the formal vote of thanks, over to Kriti ma'am, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Welcome X. Very well said. Education is the passport to future. For tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. Good evening to one and all present here. I would like to express my gratitude to all esteemed panelists of the talk show Education 4.0 for their presence and contributing graciously to this episode of the talk show. Thank you, Professor Pant sir, for explaining us about the scientific temperament, which refers to an individual attitude of logical and rational thinking. I never thought this topic, adapting new realities, will be so interesting besides enriching. Thank you for your expert guidance. It has truly motivated us to design the future path. Our special guests, Ms. Rachna Pant ma'am, Mr. Jogi Das sir, Ms. Sunita Rajiv ma'am, Ms. Anubha Srivastava ma'am, and Ms. Ritu Ranjan ma'am, I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for all of you for empowering us by sharing your support and knowledge. I extend my gratitude to Honorable Dr. Ashok Pandey sir, Dr. Rajesh Hasida sir, and Dr. Harish Chaudhary sir for taking out time from their busy schedule to grace the event and adding synergy to this episode. Also, I would like to thank Dr. Mukta Mishra ma'am for providing immense support to make the talk show successful. I must thank the Samurja team, especially Ms. Monica Khanduja ma'am, for working tirelessly to make this talk show flawless. Thank you everyone once again. Namaskar.
Thank you to the participant and thank you to Vriti ma'am. Thank you everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.